Welcome to another update via the Cayman Hurricane Center, where we have Hurricane Irma continuing to develop. And here's Adam with the information.
Hello, and thank you there, David. Yes, we have dangerous Major Hurricane Irma out in the Atlantic, about 760 miles east of the Leeward Islands. It is making its way towards the islands, and it does indeed pose a threat to portions of the Caribbean. To give you the particulars on Irma, as of the 8 p.m. advisory, located at 17.4 north, 50.3 west, and as stated before, 760 miles east of the Leeward Islands. Maximum sustained winds of 115. Present movement is off to the west to west-southwest at 14. Minimum celestial pressure is down to 951 millibars. And just to also update you on, there are hurricane watches in effect for Antigua, Barbuda, Anguilla, Montserrat, St. Kitts, St. Nevis, Saba, St. Eustatius, St. Martin, and St. Bart's. Also, interest in the remainder of the Leeward Islands. This also includes the British and U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, and possibly areas further south. Should keep an eye on this, areas such as Guadeloupe and Dominica, as well as system may also give impacts to these areas, and I'll go further into that in a second. Just wanted to point out that the NOAA, National Oceanic Atmospheric Association, or administration, has been flying their P3 hurricane hunters into the system, and this noting that this system is starting to get itself a bit better organized before it had some issues closing off its eye wall on the western side, now found closed. It is moving off in a more west-southwesterly direction, and this general motion is expected to continue with a general drift back towards the west and maybe possibly west-northwest. The hurricane force winds do extend out 35 miles, whilst tropical storm winds extend out to 140 miles. Also take note, those in the hurricane watch, that hurricane conditions are possible within that area around Tuesday night, with tropical storm conditions around the other areas late on Tuesday. Right, so there's a couple of things I want to get into very quickly. First and foremost, here's the general forecast track for Irma, and I do want to point out a few things to take note of. Don't pay too much attention to, say, 72 hours onwards. Well, I mean, still pay attention to it, but again, the forecast is somewhat tricky, and basically any further west-southwest or southwest movements can definitely push the system further south and further into the Caribbean. I want to point out that there are some forecast models. The forecast guidance for the system has been trending further south and west, as well as the forecast cone itself has been trending further south and west over time. Again, before the cone was a bit more like so, but now it's more like so. And then if the current trends continue, we may very well see this cone slip further and further, possibly into the Caribbean, and also higher threats possibly sometime later in the future within this general area. Or let me just draw this a little bit better. This general area. Yeah, it's fairly a large area, but again, there's multiple possibilities here. I'll explain why with that here in just a sec. Here is the latest surface chart. Well, there should be one updating soon. But just to give you the general synoptic pattern here, we have our large high pressure ridge that extends down as such. And again, this high pressure ridge is sort of northeast to southwest orientated, and this is what is driving Hurricane Irma down towards the west southwest. What is expected to happen is that at some point within this area here, it will start to head more west, maybe slightly west northwest as it comes around the edge of the high. However, there is still a bit of uncertainty about how much of a break there will be, and also if the high would be filling back in to the west as well. And obviously, if it would do so, it obviously push the system further and further into the Caribbean. The other things to take note of is that there would be a bit of a troughing developing across the eastern portions of the United States. This may have some sort, may or may not have some sort of effects on Irma. We'll have to wait and see how that plays out. And there's multiple situations, there's multiple tracks that this system could possibly take, and I'll run through with them in just a sec. But also to mention another area of interest here, a tropical wave with associated low pressure that has the potential to become the next storm. That will be tracking on a more westward track, a little bit further south than Irma. It is expected to reach the Windward Islands or possibly southern Leeward Islands at some point late next week or so. There's also a broad trough of low pressure here in the Bay of Campeche that is also being watched by the National Hurricane Center. This will eventually drift off towards the north, potentially giving some more rainfall impacts to areas such as Louisiana, Texas, that is still recovering from Hurricane Harvey. Okay, so just quickly here is the stirring flow, or the mean wind layer at the level that Irma is at. As mentioned, Irma is at 959, sorry. And so this pressure field is at 950 to 969. You see down here. Again, here is Irma, and here is your high pressure ridge. And again, it is fairly large and extending southwest, so that is where you get the winds. I do want to apologize for the clock, as it does go off every hour. Apologies for that. We'll just go. Have that as a blooper. We're keeping it in. We're keeping it in. Anyway, as we continue letting the dongs go by, um, it is, by the way, 8 o'clock present local time here in Grand Cayman. There we go. All right, so here is our high pressure ridge, and again, the flow is more or less southwest. And so here is somewhat of our break in the ridge. Again, there's been some question about how strong or how weak this is going to be, or if this is just going to taper out and not really cause too much of an effect. We'll have to watch. Again, one thing we should take note of is the further south and west this does track, and if it tracks further south of the cone, again, would probably impact the island some more, and possibly have a sort of different track change. So with that being said, let me use this chart here. So this is the initial forecast cone by the National Hurricane Center. There's multiple possibilities here that could play out. Again, we could have the system track a bit more further to the south, end up south of the cone, and come through the islands here. And if it does do as such, it will generally follow its sort of west-northwest track, but again, being further south, might even pass south of Puerto Rico, maybe through Hispaniola, and depending on how far, it could possibly be through here as such, or go through the Hispaniola region, end up in the southwestern Bahamas. There's also the possibility, if this happens to just start moving west-northwest already, may end up going further north and ending up maybe somewhere around here. One thing I will state is that the forecast guidance, the forecast models have been, again, as I said, shifting further and further south and west over time. What I am intrigued to find out is there will be a recon mission by NOAA, again, flying a upper level synoptic mission, which generally speaking, they will fly out of Barbados, and they will, circle around the system, and then they'll fly up and out through here, and they will measure the atmosphere, test the atmosphere, and they will use that data to put into the forecast guidance, into the forecast models, to help make the models better, and to be able to help to understand this dynamic that is going on and to better forecast. So I am intrigued to see what that data shows. That plane will be taking off tomorrow evening or late afternoon. That data will probably come out on the next model runs, probably this time tomorrow, if not a little bit later, and it'll be interesting to see what that will show. But again, with the models and their ensembles starting to trend further south, we're starting to see a few of those tracks, again, through the Caribbean here, even getting through here, and there's even some that again, move it through the islands here, come up through here, and even cross Cuba into the Northwest Caribbean and into there. But generally, the overall forecast guidance not only takes up the area of the cone, but just outside the cone here, throughout this whole entire area here, is basically more or less where your model guidance is, more or less just about all your model guidance are showing. So eventually it'll make a turn up towards the north. Whether it, again, moves further north, misses the islands into the Bahamas and then up the coast, the east coast, or whether that track will be through the Caribbean and potential impacts towards Hispaniola, potentially Jamaica, Cuba, I don't know, maybe the Cayman Islands, maybe the Bahamas again. We'll have to see how that plays out. The earlier models that suggested that we could be looking at a more out-to-sea track seems less and less likely, and matter of fact, very little, if any, models do show that anymore. So we'll have to watch closely. But one thing we are seeing is that less and less of the tracks out on the East Coast and more of the tracks over Florida and even into the Gulf of Mexico, which is definitely a concern considering the fact what happened in the west and central Gulf of Mexico with Harvey, as well as the potential Tropical Cyclone 10 at the same time crossing in Florida through the Carolinas and giving some issues there. So it will need to be watched closely, but for the time being, hurricane watches are issued for the islands here and could be extended out, including the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, parts of Hispaniola as well, possibly Turks and Caicos, maybe even the islands down here, just depending on what the forecast guidance show over the coming days. So that's pretty much it from me for now. Again, just to reiterate here the key points, we will be seeing some sort of storm or hurricane effects to the Leeward Islands. Any kind of effect to the United States, right now, I'd say it is too early to say with any certainty where in the United States it will impact, but we are confident that it would be somewhere within the U.S., whether it's the East Coast, Gulf, or Florida. We just simply don't know at this point. And I do want to caution you that if you're on social media and you see these, I would really trust them with a grain of salt, and just take very due care when you are handling that kind of stuff, because again, long range models, they have a lot of errors in them. Many things could change. Again, things could change in a space of 24 to 72 hours, much less 120, 240 hours, 5-10 days forecast. So again, I do aid on the side of caution when you are when you come across those forecasts. But anyway, the islands there should start your preparations or get your preparations to completion as the conditions will start to deteriorate from Monday going into Tuesday onwards through there. So it is definitely something that will need to be kept a very close eye on. And I'll be back with another update more than likely tomorrow when we get more recon data out there, more models getting better, and we'll let you know how that goes. And again, we'll let you guys in the Antilles know what you're going to be up against. Just pointing out that it is expected to intensify further, potentially a fairly decent Category 4 hurricane, and even some potentials of becoming a Category 5. But again, there's a lot of things that will need to go ahead, and we'll need to watch that carefully. So that will be it for me now, and I want to thank David for joining us here, and we'll be back tomorrow.